The storm came out of nowhere. A beast of wind and rain tearing through the Appalachian Trail like it had a personal grudge. I was soaked to the bone, my boots sinking into the mud. When I saw him, Elliot, his silhouette barely visible through the downpour, waving me toward the tent. By the time I stumbled inside, heart pounding, I realized we were stuck together for the night. Strangers bound by a single flimsy shelter and a secret neither of us dared to name. My name's Caleb, 24, a city kid from Chicago who thought a solo hike would fix the chaos in my head. I'd been running from myself for years, family expectations, a string of failed relationships, and the gnawing truth I kept buried. I'd seen Elliot earlier that day at a trailhead, his sharp cheekbones and quiet intensity catching my eye as he adjusted his pack. He was 26, a New Englander with a guarded smile and eyes that seemed to see through you. We'd exchanged nods, nothing more, but now here we were, crammed into his tiny tent, the air thick with the smell of wet canvas and unspoken questions. "You okay?" Elliot's voice was low, steady, cutting through the howl of the storm outside. His black hair clung to his forehead, and his green eyes flicked toward me, searching. I nodded, shivering, trying to ignore how close his shoulder was to mine. The tent was barely big enough for one, let alone two, and our knees brushed as we sat on the damp sleeping pad. He tossed me a spare shirt from his pack, dry, warm, smelling faintly of cedar, and I caught myself staring at his hands, calloused but careful, as he rummaged for it. "Thanks," I mumbled, pulling the shirt on. My skin prickled, not just from the cold. There was something about him, maybe the way he moved, deliberate but gentle, or the way he didn't push for small talk. Most hikers I'd met on the trail were chatty, eager to fill the silence, but Elliot was different. He carried himself like someone who'd learned to keep his cards close. The rain pounded harder, and a crack of thunder made me flinch. Elliot chuckled softly, the sound warm in the tight space. "First time camping in a storm?" he asked, leaning back against the tent wall, one knee bent. I shook my head, lying through my teeth. Truth was, I'd never been this far from civilization, never felt this exposed, or this aware of another person's presence. We talked for a while, haltingly at first, about the trail, the weather, the best spots to refill water. But as the night deepened, so did the conversation. He told me he was from Maine, a small town where everyone knew your business. "Left as soon as I could," he said, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Too many eyes. You know." I didn't know. I told him about Chicago, about my parents' expectations, law school, a corner office, a wife I didn't want. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I froze, waiting for his reaction. Elliot didn't flinch. He just nodded, like he'd heard it all before. "Sounds like you're running from something," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. I swallowed, my throat tight. He was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it, not to him, not to myself. The storm didn't let up, and neither did the tension between us. We were too close, too aware of each other. When he shifted to grab a protein bar from his pack, his arm brushed mine, and my pulse spiked. I tried to focus on the sound of the rain, on anything but the way his presence filled the tent. He offered me half the bar, his fingers lingering a moment too long as he passed it over. Our eyes met, and for a split second, I thought I saw something, fear, maybe, or hope, before he looked away. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice quieter now. He spread a thin blanket over us, the only thing we had to share. I lay down, my heart hammering, hyper-aware of his breathing beside me. The tent felt smaller than ever, the air charged with something I couldn't name but couldn't ignore. As I stared at the sagging canvas above, I wondered what I'd gotten myself into and why. For the first time in years, I didn't want to run. I woke to the sound of dripping water. The storm reduced to a gentle patter against the tent. Elliot was already up, sitting cross-legged, sketching something in a small notebook. His face was soft in the early light, the sharp edges of his jaw softened by the dawn filtering through the canvas. I watched him for a moment, unnoticed, my chest tight with a feeling I didn't dare name. "Morning," I croaked, sitting up. He glanced over, his smile small but genuine, and I felt my face heat up. "Sleep okay?" he asked, closing the notebook. I nodded, though I'd barely slept, too aware of his warmth beside me, the way the blanket had shifted in the night, pulling us closer. We packed up in silence, the air still heavy with the weight of last night's unspoken words. The trail was muddy, the trees dripping, but the sky was clearing, and we decided to hike together, at least for the day. Neither of us said it, but it felt like a choice we'd both made without needing to discuss it. The Appalachian Trail stretched out before us, a winding path through dense forest and rocky inclines. Elliot walked with purpose, his strides long but not rushed, and I found myself matching his pace. We talked more easily now about music, books, the little things that make a person who they are. He loved jazz, the kind that felt like a conversation, and I admitted to my obsession with old sci-fi novels. He laughed, teasing me about dog-eared paperbacks, and I shot back about his pretentious taste in music. It was easy, too easy, and that scared me. By midday, we stopped at a clearing overlooking a valley, the mountains rolling out like a painting. Elliot pulled out his sketchbook again, capturing the view with quick, confident strokes. I watched, mesmerized by the way his hands moved, the way he saw the world. "You're good," I said, leaning closer to see. He shrugged, but his eyes lit up, and I realized how much it meant to him. "You ever draw people?" I asked, half joking. He hesitated, then flipped to a page with a sketch of a man older, weathered, maybe a father or an uncle. "My dad," he said quietly. "He's why I left." The words hung there, heavy, and I didn't push. But I told him about my own dad, the way his silence felt louder than any lecture, the way I'd spent my life trying to be the son he wanted. Elliot listened, really listened, and when I finished, he didn't offer platitudes. He just said, "You're enough. You know." It hit me harder than I expected. We hiked on, the trail growing steeper, the air cooler. At one point, my foot slipped on a slick rock, and Elliot's hand shot out, steadying me. His grip was firm, his eyes locked on mine for a moment too long. "Careful," he said, but his voice was soft, almost tender. I mumbled a thanks, my heart racing, and we kept moving, but the moment lingered, a spark in the quiet. That night, we set up camp again this time, my tent, since his was still damp. It was a little bigger, but not by much, and the closeness felt different now, charged with something new. We shared a meal of instant noodles, laughing over how bad they tasted, and as the fire died down, we crawled into the tent. The blanket settled over us again, and I could feel his warmth, his breathing, the weight of his presence. I turned to say something, anything, but he was already looking at me, his eyes searching in the dim light. "Caleb," he said, barely a whisper, and my name in his voice felt like a confession. I froze, my pulse hammering, as his hand moved under the blanket, not touching me but close enough to feel the heat of it. He didn't say anything else, didn't need to. The air between us was alive, electric, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The silence in the tent was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of the blanket as Elliot shifted closer. His hand hovered near mine, not touching, but the space between us felt like a live wire. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, but my throat was tight, my heart a drumbeat in my chest. You ever feel like you're hiding from yourself? Elliot asked suddenly, his voice low, almost lost in the dark. I turned my head, meeting his gaze. His eyes were wide, vulnerable, and I saw my own fear reflected there. All the time, I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Like I'm wearing someone else's life. He nodded, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, the weight of our truths filling the tent. Then, slowly, deliberately, his fingers brushed mine under the blanket. It was barely a touch, but it sent a jolt through me, like the first spark of a fire. I didn't pull away, and neither did he. His hand stayed there, warm, tentative, a question I wasn't sure I could answer. We didn't talk about it. Instead, we lay there, side by side, the blanket a fragile barrier between us and the world. I could hear his breathing, steady but quick, and I wondered if he felt the same chaos I did. The night stretched on, and I drifted in and out of sleep, hyper-aware of his presence, of the way his hand stayed close, like an anchor. Morning came too soon, the light harsh through the tent's thin walls. Elliot was up first again, packing his gear with that same quiet focus. But there was a shift in him, a softness in the way he glanced at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. We didn't mention the night before, but it hung between us, unspoken, as we hit the trail again. The day was crisp, the air sharp with the scent of pine. We hiked in companionable silence, the rhythm of our steps syncing up. At a stream, we stopped to refill our bottles, and Elliot splashed water at me, grinning. I laughed, splashing back, and for a moment, we were just two guys, free from the weight of our pasts. But the moment passed, and I caught him watching me, his expression unreadable. Tell me something real, he said as we sat on a fallen log, eating granola bars. I hesitated, then told him about the first time I realized I was different. 15. At a school dance, watching a boy across the gym and feeling something I couldn't name. I'd buried it, tried to be the person everyone expected, but it never went away. Elliot listened, his eyes steady, and when I finished, he told me about his own first 17, a summer job at a marina, a coworker who'd kissed him behind the boathouse and then pretended it never happened. I thought I was broken, he said, his voice raw. Took me years to realize I wasn't. We didn't say the word gay, queer, anything. We didn't need to. It was there in the way we looked at each other, in the way our hands had touched under the blanket. The trail wound on, and so did we, but every step felt like we were moving toward something bigger, something inevitable. That night, we shared the tent again, the routine familiar but charged with new meaning. The blanket settled over us, and this time, when his hand found mine, I didn't hesitate. I laced my fingers with his, my heart racing, and he squeezed back, a silent promise. We didn't speak, didn't need to. The world outside the tent didn't exist, just us, our hands, and the truth we were finally starting to face. The next day felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. Elliot and I hiked closer now, our shoulders brushing on narrow parts of the trail, our glances lingering longer. His hand in mine last night had cracked something open in me, a door I'd kept locked for years. I was terrified, exhilarated, and I could tell he felt it too, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, the way his laugh came easier now. We stopped at a lookout point, the mountains sprawling below us, endless and wild. Elliot sketched again, but this time, he tilted the notebook toward me, showing a rough outline of my face-me messy hair, My crooked smile. You're not half bad to draw, he said, smirking, but there was warmth in it. I blushed, muttering something about him being a show-off, but I couldn't stop staring at the sketch, at the way he'd seen me. The trail was quieter that day, fewer hikers passing by, and it felt like the world had shrunk to just us. We talked about everything, dreams we'd abandoned, fears we'd carried. He wanted to be an artist, he said, but his dad had called it a waste of time. I told him about my half-finished novel, buried in a laptop folder because I was too scared to show anyone. You should finish it, he said, his voice firm. You've got something to say. I wanted to believe him. By dusk, we reached a small campsite near a lake, the water glassy under the fading light. We set up the tent together, moving in sync, and I caught myself watching him, the way his muscles shifted under his shirt, the way his hands were steady but gentle. Dinner was quiet, the fire crackling between us, and I felt the weight of what was coming, what we couldn't keep avoiding. In the tent, the blanket felt like a lifeline. We lay closer this time, our shoulders touching, our hands finding each other almost instinctively. Caleb, he whispered, and I turned to face him, our noses inches apart. His eyes were wide, searching, and I saw the same fear and hope I felt. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his voice trembling. Me neither, I said, and it was the truth. His hand moved, tentative, to my cheek, his thumb brushing my skin. My breath caught, and before I could think, I leaned in, closing the gap. Our lips met, soft at first, then desperate, like we'd both been starving for this. The kiss was clumsy, raw, but it was everything years of denial, of fear, of wanting, poured into that moment. His hands tangled in my hair, and I pulled him closer, the blanket falling away, forgotten. When we finally pulled back, gasping, his forehead rested against mine. I've never, he started, then stopped, his voice thick. Me neither, I said again, and we laughed, the sound shaky but real. We didn't sleep much that night, talking in whispers, stealing kisses, our hands exploring under the blanket. It wasn't just physical, it was a confession, a promise, a step into a world we'd both been too scared to claim. Morning came, and with it, a new kind of clarity. We packed up, our movements slow, reluctant. The trail waited, but so did the rest of our lives, and I wasn't sure how we'd fit this thing between Jacinto, the world beyond the mountains. But as we stepped out of the tent, his hand brushed mine, and I knew we'd figure it out, one step at a time. The trail felt different after that night, like every step carried the weight of what we'd shared. Elliot's hand brushed mine as we walked, a quiet reminder of the line we'd crossed. I kept stealing glances at him, his sharp profile, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, and my chest ached with something new, something I wasn't ready to name but couldn't ignore. We hiked toward a small trail town, planning to resupply before the next leg. The closer we got to civilization, the heavier the air felt. Out here, in the wild, we were just Caleb and Elliot, two guys figuring it out. But town meant people, eyes, judgments. I saw the tension in Elliot's shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when we passed other hikers. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him it was okay, but I didn't know if it was. In town, we grabbed coffee at a diner, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and a jukebox in the corner. We sat across from each other, our knees touching under the table, and it felt like we were stealing moments in plain sight. What happens when we leave the trail? I asked, my voice low, the question burning in my chest. Elliot stirred his coffee, his eyes distant. I don't know, he said, but I don't want this to end. His words hit me hard, and I reached for his hand under the table, squeezing it. He squeezed back, but his smile was tight, like he was bracing for something. We didn't talk about it again. Not then. But the question lingered as we restocked our packs and headed back to the trail. The mountains welcomed us back, their silence a comfort, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. That night, we camped near a ridge, the stars brighter than I'd ever seen. We didn't bother with the fire, just crawled into the tent, the blanket pulling us close. His kisses were hungrier now, less tentative, and I matched him, my hands learning the shape of him in the dark. But there was an edge to it, a desperation, like we were trying to hold on to something that might slip away. "I'm scared," I admitted later, my head on his chest, his heartbeat steady under my ear. "Of what?" he asked, his fingers tracing circles on my arm. "Of going back," I said. "Of losing this." He was quiet for a long time, then said, "Me too. But we're not there yet." His voice was firm, like he was convincing himself as much as me, and I clung to it, to him, as we fell asleep. The next day, the trail was brutal steep climbs, rocky paths, and a heat that left us drenched in sweat. We pushed through, side by side, but there was a new urgency in our steps. At a water break, Elliot pulled out his sketchbook, drawing me again, this time with a softness that made my throat tight. "I want to remember this," he said, not looking up. I didn't know what to say, so I just watched him, memorizing him too. By dusk, we reached a shelter, a wooden lean-to shared with a few other hikers. We couldn't touch, couldn't be us, not with others around, and it hurt more than I expected. We set up our sleeping pads at opposite ends, but our eyes kept finding each other, a silent promise that this wasn't over. As I lay there, staring at the roof, I realized I wasn't just falling for Elliot, it was falling into myself, into the person I'd been too scared to be. The shelter's crowded walls felt like a cage. The other hikers' snores a reminder of the world we'd have to face. Elliot and I barely spoke that night, our glances heavy with everything we couldn't say. I hated the distance, the pretense, but I saw the same frustration in his eyes, the same longing to be back in our tent, under our blanket, where we could be real. Morning brought relief. We left the shelter early, the trail pulling us back into its embrace. The path was gentler now, winding through meadows dotted with wildflowers, and we walked closer, our hands brushing deliberately. "I missed you last night," Elliot said, his voice low, and I grinned, my heart tripping over itself. "Missed you too," I said, and it felt like a vow. We talked more openly now, about what came next. Elliot wanted to move to a city, somewhere he could be himself, maybe Boston or New York. I told him about Chicago, how it could be a fresh start, how I wanted to write, to live honestly. "You could come with me," I said, half joking, but his eyes lit up, and I realized I meant it. He didn't answer, not then, but the idea hung between us, fragile but possible. That afternoon, we reached a river, wide and shallow, the water cold against our skin as we waded through. Elliot laughed, splashing me, and I tackled him, both of us falling into the current, soaking wet and breathless. For a moment, we were just us, laughing, free, the world far away. He pulled me close, his lips finding mine, and we kissed in the middle of the river, the water rushing around us, the mountains watching. Back on the trail, our clothes clung to us, but we didn't care. We set up camp early, the tent a sanctuary again. Under the blanket, his hands were bolder, tracing paths across my skin, and I let myself go, let myself feel everything. We whispered dreams to each other, places we'd go, lives we'd build. It was reckless, Maybe, but it felt right. Like we were rewriting our futures in the dark. The next day, a hiker we'd met at the shelter caught up with us. A chatty guy named Mike. He was friendly, but his presence grated, forcing us back into our separate corners. He asked questions where we were from, what we did, and I saw Elliot tense when Mike mentioned his girlfriend back home. I wanted to correct him, to claim Elliot in front of the world, but I didn't. Not yet. That night, we shared the tent again, but Mike's presence lingered, a reminder of the world's expectations. Elliot was quieter, his hand finding mine but holding it lightly, like he was afraid it might break. What if we can't do this out there? He asked, his voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer, not a good one, so I just held him tighter, hoping it was enough. The trail was nearing its end for us, the final stretch looming. We had one more night before we'd reach the trailhead, before we'd have to decide what this was, what we were. As we lay under the blanket, his head on my shoulder, I felt the weight of it all, the love, the fear, the hope. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I wasn't ready to let him go. The final day on the trail felt like a countdown. Every step brought us closer to the trailhead, to the world beyond the mountains. And I could feel Elliot pulling back, his silences longer, his smiles tighter. I wanted to grab him, to make him promise we'd be okay. But I was scared, too scared of what it meant to love him, to be us, in a world that might not understand. We hiked in near silence, the air heavy with unspoken questions. At a break, I caught him sketching again, this time a view of the trail winding into the distance. You're gonna miss this place, I said, trying to keep it light. He nodded, his eyes distant. It's not just the trail, he said, and my heart clenched, knowing he meant us. We reached the trailhead by late afternoon. The parking lot, a jarring return to reality. Cars, people, noisy. It felt wrong after the quiet of the mountains. We stood there, packs off, staring at the sign marking the end of our journey. What now? I asked, my voice cracking. Elliot looked at me, his eyes raw, and for a moment, I thought he might walk away. Instead, he took my hand, right there in the open, his grip firm. We figure it out, he said, and I saw the same determination I'd seen that first night in the tent. We drove to a nearby motel, too tired to go further, and in the dim room, we fell into each other again, the blanket replaced by cheap sheets, but the feeling the same, urgent, real, ours. That night, we talked for hours, mapping out a plan. He'd come to Chicago, stay with me while he figured out his art, his life. I'd finish my novel, tell my truth, starting with him. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and we sealed it with a kiss, a promise to try. But as we lay there, I felt the weight of what we were up against: families, expectations, a world that might not be kind. The next morning, we drove to the bus station, his ticket to Maine in hand, mine to Chicago. We'd meet again in a month, after tying up loose ends. As he hugged me, his arms tight around me, I felt the tears come, and so did he. I love you, he whispered, the first time either of us had said it, and I said it back, my voice breaking. We parted with a promise, but as I watched his bus disappear, doubt crept in. Could we really do this? Could we carry what we'd found in the tent into the world? I didn't know, but I held on to his words, his touch, the way he'd made me feel seen. The trail had changed me, and so had he, and I wasn't going back to the person I'd been. A month later, I stood at O'Hare Airport, my heart in my throat, scanning the crowd for Elliot. Chicago buzzed around me, all noise and motion, but I felt like I was back on the trail, waiting for him to appear through the trees. When I saw him, his black hair, His sharp cheekbones, that guarded smile, everything else faded away. He dropped his bag and pulled me into a hug. And I knew, right then, that we'd make it. We moved into a small apartment, a cramped studio with a view of the L tracks. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Elliot's sketches covered the walls, and my laptop hummed with the novel I was finally writing, the story of us woven into every page. We fought sometimes about money, about family, about the weight of coming out, but we always came back to each other, to the truth we'd found under that blanket. His dad called once, his voice cold through the phone, and I held Elliot after, letting him cry. My parents were harder, their silence louder than words. But I told them who I was, who we were, and it felt like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. The world wasn't always kind, but we built our own, piece by piece, in stolen kisses and late-night talks, in the way he'd sketch me when he thought I wasn't looking. One night, a year later, we went back to the trail, to the spot where we'd shared that first tent. We didn't need it this time, just a blanket under the stars, his hand in mine. "You still make my heart race," I said, and he laughed, kissing me, the sound echoing in the quiet. We weren't running anymore, not from ourselves, not from each other. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was ours, carved into the mountains, into every touch, every look. We'd face the storm literal and not and come out stronger, together. And as we lay there, the blanket pulling us close, I knew we'd keep facing it, step by step, hand in hand, for as long as we had.